This is DW News, live from Berlin. The UN Security Council approves a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Having vetoed previous votes, the United States abstains this time and everyone else votes in favour. Also on the programme, Russia's Vladimir Putin finally acknowledges that radical Islamists carried out Friday's attack on a Moscow concert hall that killed scores. 4 suspects appear in court. And Senegal's opposition candidate, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, is set to become the country's next president after his main opponent, Amadou Ba, recognises his election victory. I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to the programme. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has cancelled the visit of an Israeli delegation to Washington to discuss the war in Gaza. Now, this follows the United States' decision not to veto a UN Security Council resolution demanding a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The resolution calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire for the remainder of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and for the release of hostages. Now, it passed 14-0 after the US abstained. Washington has previously vetoed 3 ceasefire resolutions. The Security Council has been divided over the Israel-Hamas war since the October 7 terror attacks. Rosa Friedman is Professor of Law, Conflict and Global Development at the University of Reading in the UK. The focus of her research is the United Nations, especially relating to questions of human rights. Welcome to DW, Professor. So, first time a ceasefire resolution has made it through the Security Council. Were you surprised that it passed?
I think most of us were surprised that the resolution was tabled in the first place. The United States had tabled the resolution on Friday, which did not pass and was vetoed by Russia and by China. And very swiftly, the 10 members of the Security Council who don't hold a veto, who are not permanent members, who are elected for 2-year terms, tabled this resolution, one of the shortest resolutions in the Security Council's history, which had 3 key messages. And the surprise was not that it passed, but that it was tabled so swiftly in the first place.
And why do you think the US didn't vote it down this time?
The 3 key messages are ones that have global recognition. There are maybe a few states that don't agree with 1 or 2 of them, but globally there is consensus that there needs to be a ceasefire, not a permanent one, but for a short period of time, a ceasefire during the holy month of Ramadan. There is global consensus that these hostages who have been held in captivity for nearly 170 days should be released, including the babies and also the elderly and the sick. And there is global consensus that the people in Gaza in this humanitarian catastrophe must receive aid, specifically food aid, to stop a famine. So this resolution had to pass because there wasn't a single country in the UN Security Council who could say that they didn't agree with those 3 key messages.
OK, so now it has passed. I understand that this is legally binding, but can Israel simply ignore this decision?
Well, it's legally binding, and a lot of what the UN does is legally binding, but the Security Council has these added extra enforcement powers. So it can send sanctions, embargoes, no-fly zones to implement its resolutions, the decisions that it makes. Any country can, of course, ignore what the UN says, but it will ignore it at its peril. Both its peril in terms of having those implementing enforcement powers against it, but also the diplomatic, the trade, all of the other bilateral in-between states that will occur. So countries might turn around and boycott a country that ignores the UN Security Council resolution. We saw this in terms of Iraq. We saw this in terms of Yugoslavia, Rwanda. So if Israel does ignore this resolution, it will do so to its detriment. The problem is that Israel's adversary in this is a terrorist group. And the terrorist group will ignore anything that's tabled at the United Nations because it's not a sovereign state and because it doesn't care what the global community says, so long as it continues to be funded by Iran or by other countries that support its aims. So what the United States said after the vote was really crucial. It said that all countries at the Security Council must use their power to put pressure on Hamas to actually abide by the terms of this resolution and specifically to hold to the ceasefire and specifically to release the hostages, dead or alive, of whatever age and of whatever ability.
OK. So Israel has indicated that it will carry on regardless. But it, as you say, it has cover in this in as much as a state, we can say, yes, you must do this, but Israel can turn around and say, well, what about them? What about Hamas? Are you going to punish them if you punish us?
Well, the ceasefire will hold for as long as both parties adhere to it. So the minute that one party breaks it, the other party will point and say, well, they broke it. They fired a rocket into Israel, or they carried on incursions into Rafah, and they will use that as an excuse. More importantly, perhaps, is that the United States and others of Israel's allies hold the key to the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome prevents rockets from falling down and killing many, if not most, of Israelis. And those rockets aren't only coming from Gaza, they're also coming from Lebanon, from Hezbollah, which is another terrorist organization which is funded by Iran. If Israel doesn't abide to the terms of this resolution, and if its allies then don't continue to fund the Iron Dome, then this could be a very significant moment for the continuation of the State of Israel.
Thank you for walking us through that so clearly, Professor. Professor Rosa Friedman from the University of Reading in the UK.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, veteran Israeli Minister Gideon Saar has resigned from Benjamin Netanyahu's emergency unity government. Mr. Saar said he'd taken the decision after he was not included in the highest-level war cabinet. He was one of several opposition lawmakers who joined the unity government to help manage the war in Gaza after Hamas's October 7 terror attack. Let's get more on this from journalist Sami Sokol in Jerusalem. Welcome back, Sami. Will Benjamin Netanyahu regard losing Gideon Saar as significant?
Yeah, I mean, for him, it shows that he doesn't have control over the political theater. He tried by various means to convince Gideon Saar to be an observer in this war cabinet. He told him that he would be able to come every once in a while and attend the meetings of this war cabinet. But Gideon Saar was adamant that he has to be a full member in this war cabinet. And this would have caused a great problem for the government, because if Gideon Saar would have been a member of this cabinet, then Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the finance minister, who both belong to the far right, they said that they would also want to be members of this war cabinet. So he could not accept this demand by Gideon Saar.
OK. But talk us through the timing, because the war cabinet was established months ago. Why is Gideon Saar only resigning now for not being included? OK,
so Gideon Saar, historically, he was a member of the Likud party. He holds right-wing positions. As an example, he opposes any involvement of the Palestinian Authority in ruling the Gaza Strip in the day after. He is against trucks bringing in food to the Gaza Strip. So he has these position that the Israeli right and the far right support, which is starving the people in the Gaza Strip. And he's trying to disassociate himself from Benny Gantz. He ran together with him in an attempt to topple Netanyahu in the previous elections. And he's already thinking about the day after in the next elections. So he doesn't want to be together with Benny Gantz, and he rather would like to establish what he already said would be a right-wing party that would not be under Netanyahu. So he's trying to carve his way through Israeli politics. And there are those who believe that the Israeli public has been shifting to the right, but nevertheless is going against Netanyahu because of his responsibility for the 7th of October fiasco.
Right.
So there is room for these kind of right-wing politicians to get support from.
OK, so we have Gideon Saar, a member of Likud, Mr Netanyahu's own party, leaving his government. Do you think that this will be the only resignation? I wonder if we're starting to see the splintering of this coalition that's been held together by just the merest of things.
No, and Gideon Saar is not going to topple this government. He's just saying that currently he's a minister without portfolio in the government, which means that he doesn't have much impact on anything, and the decision-making is not being made in the government. So rather, he says that he wants to step aside. It doesn't mean that he will vote against the government or that he will try to topple the government by any means. He's just trying to kind of build his niche within Israeli politics, looking at the day of the elections.
OK, that's very clear. Thank you for talking us through that, Sami. Sami Sokol in Jerusalem. Now to Russia, and after initially pointing the finger at Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin now says radical Islamists carried out Friday's attack on a concert hall near Moscow in which at least 137 people were killed. The Russian president's statement comes days after repeated claims of responsibility by ISIS-K. ISIS-K is a branch of the so-called Islamic State based in Afghanistan, and their claims have been borne out by French and US intelligence sources. So let's hear a bit of what the Russian president had to say.
We know the crime was committed by radical Islamists who follow an ideology the Islamic world itself has been fighting for centuries. We're also seeing that the United States has been using various channels to convince their satellites and other countries that, according to their intelligence, there's no trace of Kyiv in the terror attack in Moscow. The bloody attack was committed by Islamists from the Islamic State organization, which is banned in Russia. We know who committed this crime against Russia and its people. We want to know who ordered it.
One after another, the suspects are dragged into a court in the Russian capital. Investigators say all of them have confessed to carrying out Friday's attack inside a Moscow concert hall. Videos have emerged on social media, suggesting some of the group were tortured while in custody. One of them brought in directly from hospital in a wheelchair. All 4 suspects are now facing terrorism charges and a possible sentence of 15 years to life in prison. Outside the Crocus City Hall, where the attack unfolded, people continue to lay flowers. On Sunday, Russia held a nationwide day of mourning for the dozens of victims.
People came to a concert. Some people came to relax with their families. And any one of us could have been in that situation. I want to express my condolences to all the families that were affected here. And I want to pay tribute to these people.
Among those here to mourn are survivors of the concert massacre. Some of the 5,000 people evacuated from the venue during the attack. Many of them with the help of the venue's workers.
I am so grateful to all of those people who were there that evening. They showed us where to go, directed us. I would like to thank each of them. They did a great job.
The country's tightly controlled media has so far not raised questions about how the security services dealt with the attack. taking place just days after President Vladimir Putin dismissed a US warning about an imminent assault.
So let's pick up parts of that with Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. Welcome back, Konstantin. Now, you watched Vladimir Putin's speech today, all of it. What did you make of it?
Well, the interesting thing is that just basically a few minutes you went on air, Phil. There was another report by the Russian state media that head of Russia's investigative committee, Alexander Bastrykin, investigative committees, well, the kind of Russian equivalent of the FBI for the sake of simplicity, reported directly to Putin and said that all those detained, or arrested rather, now by the Russian authorities have confessed to the crime, as he said, and they revealed those who contracted or commissioned this crime. So this chimes in with what Putin said earlier, that although the crime was committed, the act was committed by ISIS, by the Islamists, he wants to know who was behind it. And the hint in such speeches by Russian officials generally and Putin in particular is that, of course, it may be ISIS as executors of the terrorist atrocity, but in fact there are others behind it. And Putin repeatedly hinted that it was Kiev and the United States that support Kiev that were behind it. So I think that the report by the head of Russia's FBI to Putin just means that the Russian government, although notionally saying, yes, it was ISIS, no problem, we admit it, will continue to push the idea that it was, in fact, an Ukrainian attack on Russian citizens. And I suppose we'll see more of these pronouncements very, very soon.
OK, this seems like a bit... This seems like a weird way of operating. Saying that it was ISIS, hinting that it was Ukraine and the US, but not actually saying so, are not producing any evidence. You can do this because you're a Russian president, can you? And nobody says none of this makes sense.
Absolutely, Phil. That's a very good observation. You can say it because your name is Vladimir Putin, and you're in total control of everything in Russia. The so-called courts, the so-called police, the so-called State Duma, everything is under your control. Truth doesn't matter. What matters is the propaganda line that you want to spin to mostly the Russians, but also to to those friendly people that believe that Putin is fighting NATO or whatever they believe in quite a few other countries. And I think that this is the essence of it. Look, in normal democracy, the authorities would have been under scrutiny by parliament, by independent media, by the NGOs, regarding the failures, evident failures of the security services to prevent this atrocity, while the United States, France, and other Western nations seemingly reported, or rather warned the Kremlin, they say they did, about the possibility of such an act. But in Russia, no one is responsible to anyone. Vladimir Putin is in total control. So he has to basically spin this line because there are questions already being asked on independent Russian media and on Russian social media, those that are accessible actually also, at least in a fragmented way, in Russia itself. Why did it happen? So now he has to give an explanation. You know what? We couldn't do anything about it because it's not some kind of bunch of Islamists that is doing it. It is the United States, essentially, and its Ukrainian allies that are behind it. That makes it sound much more ominous. And that, I'm sure, will lead to repercussions domestically where a renewed hunt for quote-unquote enemies of the people will resume.
Thanks for that, Konstantin. DW's Russia analyst Konstantin Eggert. We'll take a look at some more stories making news around the world. Israel says it'll stop working with the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees in the Gaza Strip. A government spokesperson accused UNRWA of perpetuating the conflict rather than trying to relieve it. UNRWA was criticised after Israel accused some of its staff of being involved in the Hamas October 7 terror attack. In the US, Donald Trump says he'll pay a $175 million bond within 10 days after a New York appeals court slashed the original amount down from nearly $500 million. The former president and expected Republican presidential nominee was fined for inflating his worth to secure favourable loan terms. Before the reduction, he'd been facing the seizure of real estate assets. Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun is to step down by the end of the year. The plane manufacturer says his resignation is part of a wider management shake-up. Boeing has faced increased scrutiny following a series of safety incidents caused by mechanical issues. Senegal's opposition candidate is set to become president after his main opponent recognised his election victory. Senegal's governing coalition candidate Amadou Ba has congratulated opposition candidate Bassirou Diomaye Faye on winning the first round of presidential elections. Preliminary results indicate he won more than 50% of the vote, which would eliminate the need for a runoff. The Dakar Appeals Court says full official results are expected to be announced on Friday. Journalist Awa Bakalat joins us from Dakar. Welcome to DW. This seems like a quick and gracious acceptance of defeat by the ruling party. Is that the normal way of Senegalese politics?
It's not the normal way, but it's a fair play way. It's pretty much it's based on the preliminary results, as you just said a few hours ago. The candidates of the ruling party, Amadou Ba, conceded the victory to Diomaye Faye and the president of the Senegal as well. So usually the protocol is to wait a little bit by the end of the week. If the election committee confirms the result and the polls, it is due for tomorrow or maybe Wednesday. And once the Constitutional Court has the result and validate the result, usually the other candidates have 72 hours to appeal. If not, the president is officially elected, and the swearing is expected to happen on April 2nd. But it's actually the first time of the history that an opponent wins, potentially on the first runoff, which is very interesting. So this is pretty much fair play.
Yeah. So not just the fact that an opposition candidate won, but in such a crowded field of, I think it's 17 candidates. That seems like a remarkable achievement. What do you think was behind this push for change?
Oh, you may know that there is many young Senegalese who have tried in this recent years to reach Europe for a better life and a better perspective. That is the despair, the social despair or the frustration that drove many young people yesterday to vote for change. I have sincerely rarely seen such enthusiasm from the youngsters to participate to the poll. And as the candidate spent time in jail as well, it was perceived as something unfair without being sentenced. And he symbolized this unfairness and the unfair treatment of the youth by the police, but also by the justice. And he's been in detention like 10 days ago, which is very important. So this frustration was very it was very it was next to the poll, it was really recent. Sorry. Right. So the eagerness for change was still there, and the candidate also is 44 years old, so he's still very young, and he's in phase with what the youngster wants, which is a better future.
And so you think it was the youth count that carried him, because once he gets in, he'll have to deliver.
Can you repeat that question? Sorry, you break up.
You think it was the youth vote that carried him, and I just wonder about the people get in on youth votes, because they are then very, very impatient to see their faith rewarded.
Absolutely, but the thing is that when I've been speaking to people yesterday while they were celebrating this victory, they were also very aware that they need to be extremely patient, because there is a lot of topics to deal with, such as healthcare, education, student loans, and also the unemployment youth. So they are very aware that it's not going to be fixed by this year. So they are very aware of all the work that is left to do for such a young president. And yeah.
Good talking to you. Thank you so much for guiding us through that. Journalist Awa Bakala in Dakar.
Thank you, Phil.
Hundreds of Hindus are celebrating the Festival of Colours. Festivities are held mainly in India, Nepal and Pakistan to mark the start of spring. Each country has its own traditions to observe the holiday, which celebrates the triumph of good over evil.
Smeared in the vibrant colours of Holi, one of the most loved festivals in India. Millions participate in the celebration of spring.
Everyone present here has been awaiting this day for so long. And today we're very happy to be able to celebrate a fun-filled Holi.
In neighbouring Pakistan, the Hindu community marked the evening before Holi with a bonfire in Karachi. Observers gathering to light the fire they believe will destroy the bad to make way for the good.
I think you all should celebrate Holi if you can and enjoy life with different colours. Yes, life is very difficult, but there are ways to make it colourful.
Some regions, particularly in northern India, hold celebrations for a whole week in the lead-up to Holi. Along the river Ganges, taking part in festivities, people dress as the Hindu god Shiva. In Nepal, too, crowds rejoiced with colors, music, and dance.
We are celebrating the festival that has been here for generations. And now even tourists are enjoying our tradition.
For over 1 billion Hindus worldwide, it's a time to welcome the good in life and renew oneself in the hope that brings.
I'll be back in just a moment to take you through the big stories of the day today looking at the Moscow shootings and why ISIS-K has Russia in its sights. That's in just a moment here on DW.